Just like to ask some questions about some of the points that came up in the report. RVSM airspace was subject of considerable contention from several witnesses. Have you had any correspondence from your regional counterparts about Australian airspace seeking to transit through RVSM airspace where they're not certified?
Sorry, Senator, can you just say the last part of that question again?
Have you had any correspondence from your regional counterparts about Australian aircraft seeking to transit through RVSM airspace on a regular basis when they're not certified for RVSM?
We get that on a fairly regular basis because there are aircraft that are not RVSM approved. The way the RVSM airspace is constructed in the Australian jurisdiction is that we will allow aircraft on an as-is basis to operate in there if they're not approved, but if in high-density type environments that they'll be asked to go below the RVSM airspace. But having aircraft that are non-RVSM approved is a relatively regular occurrence.
Okay. Do you ever pass on to the operators of the aircraft concerns that have been raised with you by regional counterparts?
Yes, we do. We pass that on.
Could you take us on notice and let us know if you'd passed on to PelAir concerns about their Westwind aircraft?
Yep.
Because the context to that clearly is that the pilot felt some pressure not to intrude into RVSM airspace and had felt that he'd made that point clear. But I'm just interested to know what has come back through the official channels. He also talked about NMEA and whether or not the aircraft was cleared to operate into or out of NMEA. Do you get involved in discussions at all with regional authorities about whether aircraft are cleared, or is that purely between the operator and the relevant authority?
The relevant authority, so we don't get involved, Senator.
Sure. Flying that kind of a route through your automated weather briefing system, NAPES, I would expect normally to get the grid point winds as the detailed breakdown of your winds across the gradient. For a phone briefing, would the phone operator normally give the relevant winds for the planned level, or would they not give those upper level winds over a phone briefing?
Peter?
The pilot briefing officer would respond to the information requested by the pilot.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me, guys, I'm finding it really difficult to hear the witnesses.
Yes, speak up.
Thanks. ATSB recommendations, Mr Harfield, your opening comment was that where there were recommendations, you would then look to take action. Does it surprise you that ATSB reports no longer appear to have recommendations for things that might trigger, the whole discussion we've just had for the last 10 minutes? The simple concept would be you'd have a report that said, here's an issue, we recommend that the Australian government contacts its counterparts and sees what can be done. Does it surprise you that there is not a recommendation in there?
Senator, maybe it's because the way that we review reports, but I was unaware that they're no longer making recommendations as such in ATSB reports. Because when any ATSB report comes in, we look at the relevant safety factors that have come out of the particular report, and then we cross-check to whether we have actually done already something about it. This is from an air traffic perspective, or where there may be a gap between our investigative process and we track everything that comes out of an ATSB report from like safety factors or whether there were previously recommendations and track them through to resolve them. So I'm not sure why I didn't pick it up, that I wasn't aware that they were no longer making recommendations in reports.
Okay, so your internal tracking system, you have a committee or something that meets, every 6 months, every year, and reviews for each of those items that's been flagged is up to? How does that...
No, the review is done on a much more quicker cycle than that. What we do is that when we get, whether it's the safety factor or a recommendation from an ATSB report, We put that into our what we call our safety action incident reporting tracking, and those particular recommendations are then assigned responsibility to the various areas. So, for example, an air traffic control related recommendation will be assigned to me, and I take responsibility for it, and then put in the process of addressing that, and then there are milestones in there, and then I'm held to account on meeting those particular milestones.
So, you received recommendations, sorry, Senator Fawcett, from ATSB, even though ATSB allegedly doesn't make recommendations, but you receive them. Do you then make recommendations, or is that without?
No, there are two processes that go on. Say, for example, we have a particular incident that the ATSB is investigating. We investigate ourselves literally straight away because we want to check the integrity of the system. We will do our own investigation. That will have recommendations or safety improvement actions associated with them that we will take action on. When the ATSB report finally comes out and then we get it, we obviously cross-check to make sure that what we have done has been identified, and if there are any gaps, and then we will take further action as required. So we don't make any recommendations. Being in charge of the operation, I receive the recommendations and have the accountability for actioning them.
So who are you accountable to for having carried out those actions?
The Chief Executive Officer and the Board.
Okay, and is that a formalised process?
Yeah, it's reported on monthly, and tracking against SARES goes to not only the Chief Executive but also to our Board Safety Committee on at each of their meetings.
Okay, so if you had a job offer you couldn't refuse and somebody else came into your role, there'd be a process whereby all the open action items would...
It's not personality driven as such, it's role specific, and that system is there to ensure that, and the reporting against it, the action is taken.
Sure. You've highlighted a couple of times, and I completely understand that you implement regulations that are made by CASA in many instances. If in your review of an incident, you believe that there should be a change in the regulation so that you can implement it differently, do you make a recommendation to CASA that they look at that?
Yes, we do. We advise CASA saying that we've picked up this particular risk associated with an incident. These are the actions that we've taken to mitigate that particular risk, but from a systemic point of view, that we would look at changing the regulations or the manual of standards that underpins the regulations, and would make comment that we think that needs to be addressed to ensure that there is a systemic fix being made.
Do you have a similar tracking system within Air Services to say, well, we've made 5 recommendations, however many, to track if and when and how they are either closed out or if they're still open?
We will be able to advise which recommendations come up and that we've passed them on to, say, for example, CASA for further work, and where that would be at.
So if we asked you to take on notice how many such recommendations, perhaps over the last 10 years or 5 years, you've made to CASA, and how many have been actioned and closed out, you should be able to come back and tell us that?
That's correct.
Yeah. Could you do that for us?
Just